"Go home, Grandpa. You don't belong here." The voice cracked across the hush of the memorial like a whip. Shrill, sharp, and carried by the wind, it cut through the stillness with venom. Visitors nearby stopped in their tracks. Some turned slowly, others froze in place. The woman stood rigid, jaw locked, arm outstretched, finger inches from the chest of a man who barely flinched. Walter Pierce didn't raise his voice. He didn't lower his head. He just stood there, 82 years old, back straight, despite the weight of years, chest rising slowly beneath the pressed fabric of a khaki shirt. Across his breast, a faded ribbon bar clung to his veteran's hat. Vietnam. Beneath it, in his arms, cradled like something sacred, rested a neatly folded American flag, his brother's. The woman stepped forward again, blocking the path with her stance. Her shoulders heaved with tension, eyes wide and furious. She was younger, maybe 35, and dressed in black from collar to boots. A sash across her chest bore a slogan in red letters, political, loud, defiant. Her voice rose once more. "These stones don't belong to you anymore. This isn't your war." Walter didn't speak, but his eyes flickered, not with anger nor fear, but something quieter, older. They traveled past her shoulder, beyond her rage, toward the center of the stone wall behind her, toward a single engraved name worn smooth by time and memory. His grip on the flag tightened just slightly, the knuckles paling. A soft gust passed between them. The edge of the flag rippled gently, catching the light. Around them, attention gathered, thick in the air. A father held his son back with a protective hand. An elderly couple stood murmuring, hesitant to interfere. A boy with a phone aimed the camera, unsure what he was filming, but knowing it mattered. And then, in the distance, came the sound. Leather boots on stone, cane taps. A slow rhythm of men approaching, steady as a march. Behind the gate, figures emerged. Tall, broad, uniforms beneath coats, a silver badge glinting in the sun. One leaned forward, squinting. "That's Walt. What's going on here?" They picked up pace, slow, then quicker. One broke into a jog, another called a name. The woman didn't turn, she didn't see them coming, but Walt did. And still, he said nothing. Not yet. The sun rose quiet over the edge of town, gilding the bricks of a modest single-story home tucked behind an elm tree. The house had seen better paint, and the mailbox leaned slightly, its red flag long snapped off. But the grass was clipped, and the porch swept, the kind of details that told you someone still cared. Inside, the kettle whistled low. Walter Pierce reached out with a steady hand and removed it from the stovetop. He poured the water into a chipped mug with the seal of the United States Army faded on one side. A small curl of steam lifted past his face. He didn't rush. His fingers, marked with age and time, moved carefully as he set the cup on the table beside 2 slices of toast and a small jar of apple jelly. Across from him sat an empty chair. No crumbs, no plate, just a photo in a frame beside a folded napkin. In the photo, 2 young men in uniform, one grinning wide, the other squinting at the sun. The taller one, the one with broader shoulders, had a name stitched to his chest. Dean. The toast went untouched for a moment. Walt looked at the photo like he always did. Not long, not short, just enough. He rose and crossed the narrow hall. On the wall, beside a framed map of Southeast Asia, hung a shadow box with medals, dog tags, and a single patch, 1st Cavalry Division. Below it rested a triangular display holding the folded American flag. He removed it with reverence, brushing one thumb lightly across the cloth as if smoothing invisible creases. He didn't need to look at the names on the tags. He still whispered them sometimes. Back in the living room, he sat to tie his shoes. Brown leather, polished. The laces looped slower these days, but they never went undone. A small click echoed as he fastened the top button of his shirt and tugged the brim of his cap down just a notch, not out of pride, but to keep the sun off his eyes. The words across the front read, "Vietnam Veteran," not in bold, just enough to say what needed to be said. Before leaving, he opened the drawer beneath the flag case and withdrew a bundle of carnations, red and white, tied with a blue ribbon. They had started to wilt slightly, but that didn't bother him. The memorial didn't expect perfection, just presence. He locked the door behind him with a small metallic snap, stepping onto the porch. The air was crisp for spring. A neighbor jogged past with headphones in, barely glancing up. A car rumbled by with loud music that shook the curb. Walt nodded at both out of habit. Neither waved back. At the gas station down the street, he parked beside pump 3. The attendant didn't come out, just pointed at the window, holding up 3 fingers. Walt nodded, paid cash. The change came short, but he let it go. Inside the station, a teenage boy mopped the floor without looking up. Walt approached the counter with a small bottle of water and a granola bar. The clerk squinted at his cap. "That for real? Or just something from the flea market?" Walt didn't answer. Just handed over the bills, took the receipt, and said, "Have a good morning." The kid didn't reply. Back in the car, Walt placed the flowers carefully across the passenger seat, nestling the stems inside an old towel. He reached for the ignition, paused, and looked out through the windshield at the small American flag fluttering from a rusted pole beside the station sign. It had a tear near the edge. He exhaled slowly. It wasn't anger. It wasn't sadness. It was just weight. The drive to the memorial was slow, not out of hesitancy, but out of respect. Every streetlight, every block, brought him closer to the place where time stopped moving and memory lived loud. Along the road, he passed a boy on a skateboard. The boy didn't move for him. Walt shifted lanes instead. At the final turn, the trees parted. The stone monument rose from the grass like a sentinel, tall, gray, unchanging. Walt pulled into the side lot, cutting the engine. No fanfare, just silence. He sat there for a moment, the carnations resting gently on his lap, his hand upon the flag. He opened the door. A breeze stirred. Flags along the walk whispered. Footsteps tapped softly on the pavement from scattered visitors nearby. Walt stood fully now, the path before him straight, his breath steady. He took his first step, and somewhere ahead, unseen by him, she was already waiting. The air at the memorial was different than it had been just minutes ago. It carried tension now, not loud, but present, like a held breath that refused to be exhaled. Walter Pierce stepped carefully along the concrete path lined with plaques. His shoes made a soft shuffling sound with each step, the rhythm quiet and deliberate. In his hands, the carnations lay gently across the folded flag, both pressed close to his chest like sacred things. His gaze was fixed straight ahead, toward the center wall of the memorial, where hundreds of names had been carved into stone. Among them, his brother Dean's. A small group had gathered that morning, some in solemn pairs, others alone. A few tourists with pamphlets. A father whispered to his son about the names. A woman traced letters with her finger. The wind moved again, just enough to lift the corner of Walt's jacket. Then came the voice, sharp, unmistakable. "Stop right there." The words were not spoken. They were thrown. A woman stepped into his path. Short-cropped hair, black shirt, megaphone hanging from one shoulder. Her name was Mira, but Walt didn't know that yet. All he knew was the heat in her tone and the way her fingers stabbed the air between them. "You don't belong here." Walt stopped. Not abruptly, but slowly, like a man who had learned to measure every movement with care. He blinked behind his glasses, expression unreadable. The carnations trembled slightly in his grasp. Myra stepped closer, her arms tight, her breath quick. Her voice rose again. "You think you have the right to be here because of what? Some patch on your shoulder? That hat?" She gestured to the cap on his head, the one embroidered in yellow thread with the words Vietnam Veteran. She scoffed. "That doesn't mean anything anymore. Not to us." Behind them, conversations halted. One by one, heads turned. A woman paused mid-photo. A child asked, "Why is she yelling?" Walt stood still. He didn't answer, not because he lacked words, but because he knew not every moment called for them. Mira wasn't finished. Her voice cracked as she stepped even closer, her shadow now falling across the carnations. "These walls don't make you a hero. They glorify war. You want respect? You had your time. Now get out of ours." Walt's fingers curled slightly tighter around the flag. His jaw tightened, but his eyes did not flinch. Slowly, quietly, he looked past her, to the wall behind her. His gaze locked onto a single name, one he could have found blindfolded. Dean A. Pierce. A softness passed across his face, almost invisible. Then he whispered, "That's my brother." Mira paused, just a flicker of confusion, then shook her head violently. "Doesn't matter. You think a name carved in rock excuses everything? That name was written in blood." Walt's hand brushed the name carved into the stone. The noise around him fell away. In its place, the smell of smoke, the crackle of gunfire, the thrum of distant rotors. And just like that, the memorial vanished, replaced by jungle. The humid air clung to everything, skin, breath, even thought. Beneath a tangled canopy of jungle green, the world pulsed with the drone of insects and the distant thump of helicopter blades. The heat was the kind that soaked through to your bones and made every movement feel like it came with a cost. Walt crouched low in the brush, boots sunk into damp soil, his uniform heavy with sweat and soot. He could taste gunpowder in the back of his throat. Beside him, his brother Dean adjusted the bandage on a wounded soldier's thigh. Private Langston, barely 19 and going pale fast. Blood soaked the cloth, no matter how tight they tied it. "Stay with me, Langston," Dean muttered, voice low but firm. "You're not tapping out today." The boy groaned in pain, eyes rolling. Walt looked to Dean, his older brother by 3 years, taller by half a head, and somehow always calmer when things went loud. Dean's eyes caught his, dark and clear beneath a steel helmet streaked with grime. Walt's hands trembled as he loaded another magazine into his rifle. The jungle wasn't quiet anymore. Popping sounds crackled through the trees, sharp and erratic. Each one tugged at Walt's nerves like wires pulled taut. Dean touched his shoulder. "You take him, now." Walt hesitated. "Dean, I'll cover." There wasn't time to argue. Dean was already reaching for his rifle, steadying himself behind the rise of earth. Walt leaned down, slid an arm under Langston, and with a grunt, began dragging him back toward the evac point. The jungle seemed to close in tighter with every foot he gained. Behind him, gunfire exploded in fast succession. One shot, then another, then silence. Walt paused, heart hammering. He turned, just for a second. A shape collapsed in the brush. Dust and green leaves floated in the air, mixed with smoke and stillness. Walt didn't scream. He didn't cry. He just kept moving, legs burning, lungs empty. Behind him, the jungle swallowed the sound. Dean never came out. It would be 2 days before Walt was pulled onto a chopper. 2 days before he learned that Dean's body was never recovered. Only his tags found near the crater where a mortar round struck. He never told their mother the full story. But every year since, he carried the memory like a folded note in his chest. Back into the present, a sharp intake of breath echoed from behind. A mother turned her son away. Someone lowered their camera. Still, Walt didn't move. He didn't shout. He didn't retreat. He just stood, the same way he had stood decades ago when orders came loud and fear came louder. Far behind them, on the curved stone path that led from the parking lot to the memorial, a low sound began to rise. First, the steady click of metal on concrete, the unmistakable tap of a cane. Then, the creak of wheelchair tires. Then, the stomp of boots. Not rushed, not panicked, but firm. A line of older men approached in formation. Not military, but unmistakably disciplined. They wore service caps, badges pinned to vests. Some bore scars across their arms, others wore flags across their hearts. At the front, walking with measured precision, was Calvin Ridge, known as Cal to most. 77. Former Marine. Once loud, now steady. His eyes narrowed as he scanned the scene unfolding ahead. "That's Walt," he said softly to the man beside him. "What the hell's happening?" Back at the wall, Mira turned toward the noise, her jaw tightening. She raised her voice again, not just to Walt now, but to the growing crowd. "You people think you're owed something, that we should stand back and clap just because you wore a uniform. But what about what your wars left behind? What about the damage?" She pointed to the wall. "This isn't honor. This is pain." The words struck hard, scattered across the faces watching. Some nodded. Some shook their heads. Others just looked away, unsure. One man in a blue polo approached cautiously. His phone trembled as he lifted it. This doesn't feel right," he murmured. A younger woman nearby tapped her screen, recording. Another man whispered to his wife, "Isn't that Walt Pierce? I think he saved someone in '68. Still, Walt did not move. He breathed in once, long and steady. The carnations pressed closer to his chest now, as if shielding both his heart and the memory it carried. Then a small voice from the rear, unsure but firm. "That's my grandfather." A young girl stepped forward, maybe 10 years old, standing beside a man in a navy cap. Her hand clutched the man's fingers. The words hung in the air like church bells. Mira froze for half a second. From the path, Cal took a step forward. "Enough," he said, but Mira raised her hand. "No, this is a public space. That means we get a voice too." Cal didn't raise his tone. He didn't argue. He just walked forward, slowly, until he stood beside Walt. Behind them, more men followed. Veterans, some limped, some wheeled, some walked with their backs straight as flagpoles. And still, Walt did not speak. He only looked ahead, his eyes now full of something deeper than grief, something steadier than anger. Conviction. The noise of the present returned like a tide. Walt blinked, breath shallow, as the sound of footsteps pressed into the hush that had fallen over the memorial plaza. A scuff of boots against gravel, the creak of a cane, the muted clink of metals brushing fabric. Mira's voice, once sharp and dominant, had faded into a faint murmur as she realized the gathering storm was not dispersing, but forming around her. The first to arrive was Calvin "Cal" Ridge, broad-shouldered even in his old age, his United States Marine Corps hat tipped low, blazer lined with rows of ribbons that caught the morning light. He walked with precision, each step measured. As he approached the confrontation, his eyes locked on Mira's stance, then on Walt's weathered face. He didn't ask. He didn't waver. "Step aside, miss," Cal said, voice steady, low, not aggressive, but immovable. "He's earned this ground." Mira faltered, blinking like she hadn't registered his presence until now. "This isn't about him," she shot back, but the edge was softening. "This is about all of you. Your wars, your stories, your glorification of—" Her words were drowned by the crunching gravel of 20 more footsteps. Men and women in various shades of uniform and formal wear filed in, some limping, some wheeled forward by caregivers. One wore a flight jacket faded to near olive gray. Another, tall and silent, wore polished black shoes and held a bugle in gloved hands. Walt hadn't moved yet. He still stood with the flag against his chest, but his grip was different now. No longer trembling, but firm. A veteran with a silver braid across his chest whispered, "That's Walt Pierce." Another added, "The man who saved Charlie Gaines, Vietnam." Mira glanced around. Her protest signs leaned on an iron bench behind her, untouched. Her supporters, only a handful, stood frozen, eyes darting. None came to her side. "I said move!" Mira barked at Cal, now more desperate than furious. He didn't move. He simply replied, "And I said, he's earned this." The wind blew again, rustling the trees above, shaking loose a handful of golden leaves that spiraled downward, glinting in the light. One landed beside Walt's boot. "I served with Dean," Cal said suddenly, His brother, in country 67. Dean saved my life outside of Unlock. He ran through fire to drag me from a crater. Walt turned slightly, eyes glistening. He hadn't known. The crowd that had been gathering on the outer edge, tourists, locals, curious passers-by, began to fill in the space between the benches and the hedgerows. Phones came out, but no one spoke. They just watched. Another voice, softer, from a young woman standing to the side. "That man helped build this memorial, my dad told me." Then from the rear, "He taught my grandson how to fold the flag." The silence became reverent. Mira stood alone now, the shouting drained from her body, her hands loosely at her sides. Her mouth opened to speak, but closed again. Walt stepped forward. His gait was slow, careful, but with a dignity that no confrontation could extinguish. The flag remained tucked under one arm. His free hand rose and brushed across the engraved name on the wall. Dean A. Pierce. The touch lingered, trembling for a breath, then stilled. Behind him, a single veteran raised his hand in salute, then another, then 5 more. A silent row of hands formed behind him, some shaky, some perfectly straight, all deliberate. No one ordered it. No one needed to. The power of it surged through the quiet, thickening the air. From among the crowd, a child stepped forward, a boy no older than 9, and placed his hand over his heart. He said nothing. He simply stood there, eyes wide, head slightly bowed. His presence punctured the tension more deeply than 100 voices. Walt turned his head slightly. Mira hadn't moved, but her eyes had fallen. Her mouth was pressed into a thin line. The fight was gone. The wind lifted the corner of the folded flag in Walt's arm. He tightened his grip and looked once more to the sky. The moment stretched like time itself had taken a breath. Walt stood still before the wall, the faces behind him forming a silent battalion. Dozens of veterans now filled the plaza. Some wore pressed blazers adorned with medals. Others wore plain shirts, sleeves rolled up, wrists wrapped in old scars and still healing joints. Their posture was imperfect, their limbs tired, but every one of them stood as tall as the day they were sworn in. Walt knelt slowly. The silence deepened, broken only by the sound of knees creaking, gravel shifting. A few quiet breaths. He reached into his pocket and drew out a small bouquet. White carnations bound in ribbon, slightly frayed from the walk. Gently, reverently, he laid them beneath the name engraved into the polished stone. Dean A. Pierce, 1968. His fingers rested there for a moment longer, tracing the letters with the edge of a thumb. They weren't cold to him. They were familiar. The weight of them lived in his spine, in the way his shoulders carried his years, in the half-smile he'd given the morning he left his house, knowing he would walk these steps again. A breeze danced through the memorial grove, stirring the flag in his arm. Walt straightened his back and stood. Slowly, he raised his hand to his brow. The salute was not rigid. It was respectful, personal, etched with the time of decades and memories. His hand hovered there, and for a long second, the world seemed to exhale with him. Behind him, the other veterans saluted in unison, one by one, a ripple of hands to temples, a rise of pride, not noise. No one gave orders. There was no command, only understanding. Among the civilians who had gathered, a woman lowered her phone. Her eyes were full. A man beside her whispered something inaudible to his son, who nodded and mimicked the salute with quiet reverence. A grandmother clasped her hands and wept silently into her scarf. Mira had not left. She remained near the center, the same place she had blocked minutes ago, but her arms were now folded tightly across her chest, not in defiance but in retreat. Her eyes moved across the field of men and women who had, without anger, surrounded her not to attack, but to protect something she had not yet understood. She saw Cal, the Marine who first stepped in, lower his salute last. He looked her way, and for a moment she saw no hatred, no triumph, only steadiness, as if he wasn't there to argue, only to witness. Walt turned around. He didn't speak to Mira. He didn't need to, but their eyes met. She looked away, then back. And in that pause, the briefest of silences, something shifted. Not fully, not forgiveness, but awareness. He approached the granite step at the foot of the main monument and placed the folded flag down. It was crisp, the corners tucked with precision, the stars showing just so. He smoothed the edge once with his hand, then stepped back. A gust of wind lifted one side, but the flag held firm, weighted by care and presence. From the pathway beyond, a low rumble broke the stillness. A group of younger servicemen, off duty, had arrived late, having heard whispers of something happening at the memorial. They didn't speak. They stood at attention behind the others, joining the silent line. A few moments later, the silence broke not with applause, but with a single voice. "Thank you, mister." The boy who had stood with his hand on his heart stepped forward. His cheeks were pink, his eyes round. He tugged gently at Walt's sleeve. Walt looked down. The child pointed to the wall. "Was that your brother?" Walt nodded. "He was the best of us." "Did he save people?" "Yes," Walt said, voice catching. "He saved me." The boy took his hand, small fingers curling around calloused ones, and just stood there. It was not for show. It was not for a camera. It was because something in that child understood what his presence meant. The crowd let out a soft breath together. No cheering, no shouting. Just stillness, the kind that only truth leaves behind. And then, as if the sky itself acknowledged it, the sun broke fully through the clouds. Golden light swept across the memorial, striking the names on the stone in rows of gleaming silver. The folded flag caught the glow and shone like it had never been touched by disrespect. By nightfall, the moment had traveled far beyond the marble of the memorial. The first clip uploaded was shaky, filmed from a smartphone, hands trembling, capturing Walt's salute with the crowd standing behind him. It was only 27 seconds long, but by morning, it had over 4 million views. The video's title changed as it was shared across platforms. "Veteran blocked at memorial. Watch what happens next." Then, "Salute heard around the nation." Then simply, "Walt." Walt Pierce had become a name people remembered. The local news station interviewed him that same week. Cameras rolled as he sat on his porch in his buttoned shirt, the shadow box resting beside him, the old porch flag fluttering over his shoulder. When asked what the moment meant, he paused for a long while before answering. "It meant we're still standing. Not just me, all of us." The mayor of the town visited him 3 days later, not with sound bites, but with sincerity. She came with a proclamation. Dean Pierce Memorial Day would now be recognized annually, honoring the fallen and the families who carried the silence afterward. She also unveiled something else, a permanent policy. From that day forward, veterans and their guests would have reserved early access to the memorial grounds every morning, protected time for remembrance, undisturbed by crowds, protests, or any kind of noise. At the base of the monument, groundskeepers installed a new plaque. Bronze, hand-polished, simple words etched deep, "To the ones who stood, and the ones who stood for them." Mira, the protester, issued a written statement through her organization. It did not erase what had been done, but it acknowledged it. She spoke of reflection, of pain turned outward, of confusion channeled in the wrong direction. She never made a public appearance again. But Walt heard from a librarian downtown that a young woman had come asking for books about the Vietnam War. She had requested memoirs, not headlines, not analysis, just stories. Small ripples moved through the community. A local high school added a Veteran Voices speaker series. Walt was the first to attend, not to speak, just to listen. The young boy who had held his hand that day. His parents wrote a letter. They wanted Walt to know that their son had asked to visit the memorial again the following week. And this time, he brought flowers for the man who saved his brother. And so, in a town that had grown too fast and remembered too little, something changed. Not with fireworks, Not with parades, but with new silence, the kind that made space for remembrance, a silence earned. Evening returned to the quiet street where Walt Pierce lived, a hush drawn across rooftops, touched by a fading sky of indigo and brass. The porch light clicked on with a soft hum. Moths circled the bulb in slow spirals, dancing on warm air that smelled faintly of cut grass and distant honeysuckle. Walt sat in his rocking chair, body still but mind adrift. The shadow box rested on his lap. Inside it, the flag folded tight, its blue field and white stars sharp against glass. He did not touch it. He just looked. On the small table beside him lay a newspaper, half read. Its front page showed a photograph taken 2 days prior. Walt saluting, 30 veterans behind him, hands raised to their brows. The headline beneath it was simple: "He stood, so we could." A breeze stirred the chimes by the screen door. They clinked softly, the notes mellow and familiar. Across the road, porch lights glowed in neighborly rhythm. And a new flag now flew from the Jenkins front steps, freshly mounted. Walt noticed. He always did. He reached for a letter tucked into the pages of the paper. It had no return address, just careful handwriting in slanted lines. He read it again, slowly. "Mr. Pierce, I watched that moment from 1,000 miles away. I never met my grandfather. He didn't come back. But yesterday, I felt like I did. Thank you for showing us how to stand when it matters." He folded the letter once more, pressing it flat with both palms, as if sealing something sacred inside. Then he stood, slowly, carefully. His bones ached, but not with weariness, only with time. He walked down the steps, past the porch, into the yard where a small wooden post stood near his azalea bushes. A single flag flew from it, lit from below by a small solar lamp, glowing soft like memory. He reached the base, took off his cap, and stood still. The night air carried no noise, only crickets, and a breeze that moved gently through the world, respectful and wide. Walt's silhouette lingered, the shape of a man not asking for anything, just remembering and being remembered. The stars emerged overhead one by one, like old friends returning to keep watch. He looked up and whispered, "We're still here, Dean." The wind touched his shoulder, then moved on. And the flag, it fluttered. If stories like this resonate with your heart, like and subscribe for more untold moments of honor and kindness. Let us know where you are watching from, and if this moment brought back memories you carry with you, because the best way to honor their memory is to keep listening. Click on the suggested video now, and we'll walk together through another untold chapter of courage and sacrifice.